Welcome to Desert Island Disk Drive, the podcast where guests pick 5 video games they'll take to a desert island and share the stories behind them. Not the best games ever made, the games that made us. I'm Joe, and this is Desert Island Disk Drive. Hello, and welcome to Desert Island Disk Drive. I'm your host, Joe. My guest today is Neil, who hosts the Ancient History Hound podcast. Neil, welcome to the island. For anyone who hasn't come across your show, can you give us a quick pitch?
Yeah, of course. And thank you very much, by the way, for allowing me to be on what I think is a fantastic idea for a podcast. My podcast isn't as original as yours. It's a bit older, though, and it deals with ancient history. My background is ancient history, so I studied it at degree and master's level, and like many people, didn't really do much with it apart from that, but it's been an ongoing passion. And as such, I started a podcast up about 8 years ago, cover ancient history, which is largely ancient Rome, ancient Greece, Mesopotamia. My angle on things is that I either try and cover mainstream topics from a slightly different perspective, or I try and find things I don't often see spoken about in the ancient world, such as particular events, festivals, things that you may not always come across. So, if you're interested in that kind of thing, it's safer work. I think it's pitched at various levels. I think you don't need to know a great deal about ancient history to be interested and get involved in what I'm talking about. But likewise, if you are someone who's studying, I know it's been used as a study aid as well. Get in there, have a look through. All I'll ask you to do is go and find the Ancient History Hound podcast wherever you can find it, and it's pretty much everywhere. Scroll through the episodes, see if there's something that you like. And I'm also, by the way, on social media with just ancient history stuff. It's Ancient Blogger on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube that I've got a channel for I've had for a very long time. And there's even the Ancient History Hound subreddit. There we go. That's the pitch that I can give you, and hopefully there might be a few people. And there are a couple of choices in these games which will become apparent from my love of ancient history.
Amazing. No, I can't wait to hear those picks and how they relate to kind of your obviously passion project with the Ancient History Hound podcast. All of the details will be in the show notes as well. Before we get into your picks, I'm always curious about how people first got into gaming. Where did it start for you?
I'm closing on 50. So for me, I was growing up in the 80s where games were something that were very new. And I remember when I was thinking about this and thinking, when was the oldest game that I remember playing? And I think it was at school. And it was on a BBC Micro, and it was called Granny's Garden. And it was a text-based adventure with pictures that took ages to download. Just to give you an idea, just Google it, and you can see exactly what I mean by that. I really liked reading as a kid. I also like the narratives, the stories, the spaces that games could give you to imagine and interact because they were quite basic, but they're also very different in the sense that there was a lot more space for them to do. There weren't the options that are very filled these days with games, and I sometimes feel a bit of poignancy for the old way of gaming because there was those creative spaces to go to. There's still some incredibly great creative games, but I feel sorry sometimes for game developers now because it must be difficult trying to make something that hasn't already been done before. In the 80s, it felt like there was a lot of different types of games that you could create. Like most kids, I grew up around the Commodore 64. But the sad thing was that my dad hated computers. He was one of these very much outdoorsy types. So I never really got the chance to play much in the way of having a computer until he finally decided to get me a computer. And there I was thinking, I'm going to get a Commodore 64. This is going to be amazing. He got me an Archimedes A3000. This is a computer I don't think many people will remember. It wasn't exactly known for games. When he first bought it, he thought I would be going into computer animated design or CAD, and that's really what the computer I think was largely built around, that sort of thing. So yeah, that was fab. Cheers, Dad. It had a whole megabyte of RAM, just to make people realize what we're talking
Impressive.
about now. Yeah, it was very, very basic, but there were some good games on there. There were some games that you could get, and I remember playing Interdictor, which was a flight simulator, Conqueror, which was a tank game. There was a game called Gods, which was surprisingly, I think you could get it on the Amiga and other games, so it was quite good that it came out in the Archimedes. And Elite. Elite was a great game for those who might have come across the more recent incarnations of that. It was just a really interesting game because you could just more or less do anything. There didn't seem to be an objective other than just don't get blown up. And then, of course, after that, you have the Sega Mega Drive that came out in 1990, and I managed to get one of those, and we used to hire games when you'd go down to video store, and you could also get games on hire as well. And again, some of them I used to play were GoldenEye. Sonic, I wasn't too bothered by, but it gives you an idea of what was going on back then. Streets of Rage, Street Fighter, obviously, Micro Machines, which was weirdly addictive. There was Desert or Jungle Strike. I forget which one it was, but it involved a helicopter and a winch that I could never get to work, and Altered Beast as well, which was another game. But there were lots of these different types of games and ways to play, and you could play, with your mates and sort of just have a good time. So that's really what got me into it because I was fascinated by all the different options and the creativity and the stories and everything else. And when it came to deciding what my picks were, I had a really difficult time because if anyone wants to try it, just get a piece of paper and pick your 5. I suspect you'll go through the same thing that I went through. You'll pick the ones that you think were the best, but then they're not necessarily the ones that you want to have on your list. These are games that I've chosen, 2 of which I still play, but the other games are just very much nostalgic events, and they were tied to times where I had a particular memory of the game and a fond association. And so, yeah, so I've tried to pick them out. I'm going to work through them, I think, as best chronologically as I can, but I think the first 3 are largely around the same time period. So yeah, that's what got me into gaming, and it's been something I've done ever since, and I still game to this day.
No, thanks for sharing. Like, it's always so interesting to hear people's own history of games and where they started. Um, Given you've had that like breadth of experience, I'm really interested to see what resonated with you, obviously growing up and still resonates now today. So before we begin, I just want to reiterate the situation. You're stranded on a desert island. There's a TV, a console that plays everything ever made, and limited electricity. You get 5 games to last you the rest of your island life. So, what's your first game?
First game is Tomb Raider 2. This came out in 1997. And to understand Tomb Raider 2, you have to understand the time that it was made in because there was a bit of controversy because Lara Croft was depicted very much in the game, shall we say, with a quite an interesting anatomy that caused a bit of, I would say consternation, but people were really? And if you look back at it now, you'll think, wow, how was that ever considered a thing? But you have to realize this was the period of time where you had loaded, where you had very much the lad culture. But it was a game that really broke into the mainstream. And just to give myself a caveat, the reason I was interested in this game wasn't because of Lara Croft and the way she looked. It was genuinely because of the game. I was obviously someone who loved ancient history, so this really linked in with that. And it also linked into the enjoyment I had with puzzle games and things that you could do because it gave you a lot of these options. And in Tomb Raider 2, you had a lot of different things. I still remember when I first started playing it, just that opening bit when you're on the Great Wall and the idea that you could go anywhere. And I wasn't really sure what I should do, where I should go. And that was something that sort of went throughout the game. I had a friend who used to sort of come, he'd cycle up to my house and we'd sit down and we'd play it of an evening and try and figure things out. Still to this day, I don't know how I missed it, but there was a section where you need to get down to a shipwreck. And I remember spending ages trying to work out how you actually get into the shipwreck before you drown. And you could, of course, buy guidebooks, but we didn't have the money to buy guidebooks, but you could get guidebooks, but there was no way that you could access information about this game. There wasn't the internet with ready-made guides. You can just check your phone or anything like that. The other thing that this game introduced me to and why it stuck with me is because it had possibly the most frustrating level or mission that I've ever come across, or one rather that really burnt me. And that was the level in Venice. For those who've played it, you might know this, but you had to get out of Venice, and in order to do so, you had to flick a lever, and then you had to run around, get into a boat and sort of speedboat, and make it round the canals, and you had to do it really within I think now, I haven't gone back and played it. I'm that burnt by it. I wonder if I went back and played it now, it would be a lot easier. But at the time, it seemed impossible. And this was largely because if at any point you brushed up against the wall in the boat or you fell in the water, that was it. You had to start all over again. You had to wait until the timer ran down, go flick the lever again. And it was just incredible. It wound me up. And I even remember being wound up by it when I was playing other games. So in the earlier versions of Assassin's Creed Odyssey, there were weird camera glitches sometimes. You needed to perform a particular movement. You'd be climbing up a wall. You go to move the direction controller to the left or to the right. Just as you were doing it, the camera angle changes. So now you're moving up and down or something weird like that. And that was very much a part of the Tomb Raider experience in that level because there were particular points where you're running down things a staircase, then all of a sudden you turn to the right, or I think it was the right, but the camera angle's changed, so now all of a sudden your direction's changed, or that's how I remember it anyway. So Tomb Raider 2 was again for me a really special game because it crossed into the mainstream. It was the first game that I really knew about that people who didn't play games were interested in. I think that was partially again because of the way it was marketed, controversially, you might say, because of uh, Lara Croft. To put it this way, I don't think if you'd gone to fancy dress parties prior to Tomb Raider coming out, I'm not sure that you would have seen people dressed as a character from a a game. You might have seen a few Marios and whatnot. Yeah, fair enough. But I remember there being a surfeit of when I was obviously pretty young, but girls dressed up as Lara Croft. It was something that people were quite obsessed by that character, and that was something different. And I know that now we have sort of Grand Theft Auto as being a game which really crossed over into the mainstream, and people think of it in that context. But I think Tomb Raider 2, in some ways, anticipated that, or certainly accessed that cultural dynamic. So Tomb Raider 2 is the first game that I've chosen. Though I'd have to skip that level or find a way of getting around the Venice level. Although I have got plenty of time to play it, so that was my first.
Thanks. Yeah, that was going to be my follow-up question. Like, given that you're on this island, there's that sense of obviously frustration with that particular level. But is the reason why you've decided to take it because there was that frustration, but you overcame it, and that kind of
Yeah,
was there a relief in that
that what
managing to
it
get through it?
was. When you got the cutscene, if you're going through, you had to do a jump at the end. I just felt great. And I've never been someone who is very good controlling their rage when it comes to games. It's why when the Demon Souls and those games came out, I'm not going to be able to do this. I remember playing one of them, and it was a Tower of Latria, and I played for what seemed hours, and I thought, okay, I've killed most of the bad things around here. I'm going to be okay. And then I just fell off. There was just a hole in one of the ledges, which apparently was a thing. Everyone knows about it. Well, I found it out by falling through, and that was like 3 hours, 4 hours of gameplay. And I know that with Souls games, everyone has that story. It's almost like a badge of honor. Show me how many hours you played in that game before you got pointlessly killed by something. And I suppose that was my first badge of being able to have an achievement with game because I'm not the most patient of people, particularly with gaming. I would rather not play than play and fail, which is something actually weirdly enough links into the next game, because I played with someone who was completely opposite to me, and he would try and complete any and every challenge, and he did actually in this game. So it was yeah. So there's a theme.
Okay, well, I think that's a good segue into the next game then.
So the next game is GoldenEye. This was on the N64, and it's something of a cult game. I think the N64. I only ever played two other games on the N64. One of them was Mario Kart, and the other one was Rogue Squadron. Rogue Squadron was awesome, by the way. It was great. Mario Kart, I was at university at the time. Mario Kart was the way we solved decisions, arguments, who had to do the washing up, that sort of a thing. GoldenEye was a, I just loved the game for a couple of reasons. So first of all, the soundtrack was amazing. That soundtrack with I'm not going to try and impersonate it, but when you first load up the game, that it's got that kind of like echoey sci-fi thing. It's just awesome. It just had something. The levels were really fun. The weapons good. You had the multiplayer as well, which was, which again allowed you to run around of a Saturday evening and sort of shoot your friends who you were sharing a house with and solve again possible disputes. I had a friend who unlocked every single challenge because I think some of the challenges on higher levels were all about time. I know there was one that was particularly with, I think it was one with the spaceship or a ship rocket launch or something, and he played it dozens of times. I remember sitting with him in the room watching him, and he would fail because he just not quite get up the ladder quick enough or something, start again. And it was I just couldn't even conceive of being that dedicated. But he unlocked everything, which meant that we had the mods. We could play the man with a golden gun. We had the mod where you had everyone had a huge head for some reason. I don't know what that was about. There was so much variety, and it seemed like a game that didn't take itself too seriously because you had all these unlockable options that you could just engage with. So it's that crossover between being a great single player experience. I still think now of the when you're outside in the snow and you've got that the first bit in the level with the snow. That's awesome. That's great. The Walther PPK. The downside to it is like many games, when you look back on it, and I did pick up an N64 about 10 years ago with the idea of playing this and Rogue Squadron, and it hasn't aged well. It hasn't aged well. It reminded me, weirdly enough, of Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, where you have these very blocky characters, and in your mind at the time, this was amazing. But then again, you don't have a frame of reference, so it was great because it was really realistic. But when you look back now at it, you might think, how how was anyone really? It looks like Minecraft type figures, but with guns. I really enjoyed it. It was, I think, for many people who've played it or played it at that time, I suspect that they'll be agreeing with me because it seems like a popular game for people that played it. It's just I don't know how many people ever played it.
No, it's a cult classic, definitely. Whether you played it at the time, I played it at university, even though university was slightly later when it was released because it was such a great multiplayer game. I think you made a really good point. Like it wasn't just the multi. I think most people remember it for the multiplayer because that was so fun. But the single player, like I said, was excellent. The soundtrack, the level
Mm.
design, it was such an amazing game. Like going back to kind of your multiplayer experiences, like did you have any like house rules? Like could I know Odd Job was quite a controversial character to pick because he was quite small, so it was harder to shoot him. Or
If you have rules, you have to accept that you have a civil culture in which those rules can be embedded. The student house I lived in didn't have anything approaching culture apart from what we found in the fridge. It was no, we didn't have rules. It was largely just get on it and you picked who you picked, and whoever won did do the washing up or had to buy the beers or some other punishment.
I love that. A free for all, then just best
Yeah,
man
yeah.
wins. Amazing. So let's move on to your pick number three.
Yeah, moving into the sort of sporting realm, and this one actually was difficult to pick for a number of reasons. So this is Championship Manager, and a lot of people may remember this game. In fact, it's a great icebreaker. I recently got chatting to a guy at work who I didn't really know that well, and I somehow dropped a reference to Championship Manager, and now that's all we ever talk about. He's about 15 years younger than me, and we just talk about that game. So Championship Manager, just to give it a bit of prehistory on it, I started playing football management games. The first one that would have, in theory, replaced this was actually Football Crazy. That was a game on the Amiga. It was 1991. It was incredibly basic. There are about three screens. You right mouse click was enter. Players had very basic attributes. Goalkeepers didn't even have a goalkeeping attribute. So we were never quite sure what made the goalkeeper any good, but it was incredibly addictive because you could only do so much. You just basically picked a squad, you could sign players, you could sell players, and that was it. And there wasn't an easy way of making money. You had to start in Division 4 because back then it was before Sky. So when football was very different in a number of ways, you started at Division 4 and you'd pick a team. And there used to be like three of us who would regularly play football most of the day, get a pizza, and then play this together. And because there wasn't a great deal of detail, you kind of invented stories about players that you just bought. And you'd, you'd submit your team, and then all you'd see was screens pop up. It would show Division 1 results, Division 2 results, Division 3, and then you'd see yours. And that would be it. You had to you had to go on your team screen to see who'd scored, but it had that, oh, how am I going to get on? And again, it's funded by a sort of, I'd say, childlike naivety at the time. You're sort of really fascinated by everything. So I really like football management games back in the day. Football Crazy, you had Football Masters. Championship Manager came out in, I think it was 92 or 93. I think there were a couple versions. And I remember to this day a friend telling me that there was this football management game that gave you updates and sort of gave you commentary along the bottom of the screen. And I said to him, "That's a stupid idea," which is just, testament to how badly I can predict the future because, of course, this became a huge thing. Now, in the late 90s, Championship Manager became a huge thing. And it's one of those games which, if you've played it, you got a conversation point. It was, and I remember this at the time, it was cited in divorce cases. There were stories. I got into a forum once about what people would do when how dedicated they were. There was a guy who failed his university degree because rather than do a 10,000 word dissertation on mechanical engineering, whatever it was he did it on Adrian Dunwell, who was a youth player at West Ham, and he wrote basically his biography. And the thing was, when he put it on, everyone wanted it. Can you send me a copy? I'd happily read that. There were stories about people wearing suits if they got into the FA Cup final, so they'd sit down. There was a guy who I read who had planned out the victory parade on a map. People really got into this, and this game. The key to this game was it was a time sink, and it showed me how addictive games could be, which wasn't always a good thing. I should add there was a bit of a other side to the coin on this, and that was it really got me angry. Now, I knew I going to sound a bit over the top here, but I noticed in myself I was addicted to playing it. I noticed that if I had gone 5 games without a win or whatever, it would really temper my mood to how I interacted with people in the real world. So I had to be kind of a bit careful about playing this game. Everyone had favorite players in there. You can see lists and lists, and I'm sure I'm going to miss some out. So apologies, but I remember Zlatan, Abrahamovic, you had Cherno Samba, who's cult, Freddie Adu, Mark Kerr, Kim Kallstrom. Mine was always David Collins because I was, for some bizarre reason, which I won't go into, I'm a Burnley fan or Burnley supporter, even though I'm from the south. I've never actually even been to Burnley. But David Collins was a reserve player at Burnley who apparently didn't exist in the real world. He'd just been added in, and he was fantastic. And that actually comes back to a couple of stories I heard about the original Championship Manager, or rather the one in '92 or '93. Cambridge and Barnet were both incredible teams, or had really good players, and apparently half of these were the programmers who put themselves in, which I think led to a couple sackings. I'm not sure on that. Don't quote me on that. So there needs to be a documentary, a Netflix documentary made on Championship Manager, and it was so addictive. And I will give you an anecdote. This happened to me, on my eyes, as it were. And I was at university, first year, Friday afternoon. That Friday evening was the student union bar, and I had been told that there was someone was going along, and she had shown interest. Apparently, she'd asked her friend about me, and obviously passing notes, as it were. And I was absolutely gobsmacked because she was well out of my league. And I thought, wow, this is, blimey, I don't understand perhaps she's got my name mixed up. But I'm going to see how things go. And it's 3 o'clock. And my mate goes, we can't go to the SU too early. We've got to get there, sort of 7-ish. Okay, so we've got 4 hours to kill. Well, I'll load up a game. Yeah, we'll stick a game on. I'll get some cheese on toast going. That can be our dinner because we're students. Now, the next time I remember, it was around midday on Saturday, and we had played throughout the night and sort of coming back into the real world in the afternoon when one of the girls who lived in our sort of first year digs student house type place sort of put her head round the door and said, what?" And she was absolutely astounded. Now, so it turns out the potential date I had was not best pleased that I had chosen to forego her, not because of a family emergency or sickness, but because I wanted to see whether or not I could get Matty Hayward at Burnley playing well with Brad Maylett. Do I put him behind the front two, put him up front, stick on the right wing, or all of this kind of thing. Yeah, so I never that didn't do well. And the strange thing is, I can't remember. I can remember her. I cannot remember the game itself. And if I had to do it all over again, I'd absolutely do the same thing. I'd be playing Championship Manager over and I think that itself tells me everything I need to know about that game.
No, I think you're probably not the first person in history who's potentially chosen to play video games
No,
over than.
no, 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 not at all.
No, I
Not one
love
bit.
that. I love the history and lore of these kind of sometimes players who are actually real. and then there are these fake or fabricated players, but have this almost kind of mythical status. If you can get them
Yeah,
within the game, they've got this excellent
yeah.
stats and they can propel you up the leagues. You're right. There should be a documentary because I've heard all kinds of stories where people have applied to become football managers based on their own experience within Championship Manager. Um, so I assume,
Sorry to interrupt.
yeah, no,
There was apparently there is again. I'm going to hope this is all right, so I'm going to put allegedly in front of this. Don't worry, no one's going to get in trouble. Gordon Strachan, I think, when he was managing Southampton, had a copy of Championship Manager on his desk or behind his desk, and apparently he used it to scout players, or it'd been used in some way. And I know that in the later games, so we go into Football Manager, people who sort of created shortlists on Football Manager and scouted players to make sure that the Woking centre back we got the accurate stats. Some of them have been employed as scouts as sort of data crunchers. And you look at where football is now, it is all about data and number crunching, and you have models that are built around whether or not a player will make it, not just passing an eye test, but they'll look into these real detailed I suppose, parameters of stats and everything else. So in many ways, this actually anticipated it because it was all about creating databases, and you see that a lot with football now. Anyway, sorry, I just remembered that about Gordon Strachan. I hope that's accurate.
well, yeah, well, allegedly. Um, no, you're absolutely right. I'm sure the analysts who are putting data into this game is bound to be used for real world purposes. So, um, I my final question was going to be: I assume Burnley was then your team throughout all of this.
Yeah, I always pick Burnley, which was remarkably naive of me when you think about all the options. I always used to do that thing, and it's the same when it comes to character creation in other games, particularly my last game that I'll talk about. I pretend that there's an option. I pretend, no, perhaps I'll choose Macclesfield. Well, I want to do lower league teams. So why don't I choose, I don't know, uh, Plymouth or one of those teams where you could do something interesting with. Because whenever I played Football Manager, I never really wanted to go in at the top level because I felt like, well, you've taken Liverpool to another FA Cup final. That's great if you're a Liverpool fan, but if you're not, then perhaps you're not that bothered. I like to try and build, I say a legacy. It's not real, but I like to try and build a something when I picked up a team. So I'd try and find a team that was lower league and really built them up and got them through and got them success. And I think that you'll often find that with people talking about Championship Manager. You'll have someone who'll say, "Yeah, I got Torquay. Here's my Torquay team. 8th year in a row we've won the Champions League." And you think, "Wow,
Strange mention from Torquay. That's actually where I'm from, and the team that I
all
would
right,
pick. Yeah,
ah,
uh,
fantastic."
but no, that like I've played it myself, or the Football Manager incarnation, and sometimes you'll pick Manchester United, and sometimes you pick Torquay because there's a sense of like progress going up through the leagues and getting the reward of actually accomplishing that. So no, absolutely. Okay, we are on to the penultimate pick, which is number 4.
This game was a game that is out of all of the games that I've ever played. It's the one that I've looked forward to the most, and this is 'cause I've actually seen it, but not in a game context. So this is Rome Total War, which came out in 2004. It's the original Rome Total War, and initially the game engine had been used on a TV show called Time Commanders. If you can look it up, you can go back and watch it. And the premise was that you had a particular battle from ancient history, and you were going to bring in a bunch of people who'd never really known anything about it, like a team of people, and they would be briefed by experts. And one of them would take overall command, one of them would take command of a couple of units, and you'd have it on the big screen. You'd have these experts that would be talking about, yes, in AD, whatever, or something BC, talking about the premise and the individual units. And I'd watch it, and sometimes I'd be shouting at the screen because people would just be doing the stupidest things. Again, that's no judgment on them because if anything's taught me about my gaming life or gaming experience, I can never criticize anyone. And I'm sure I've made many more and larger mistakes, just not on TV. So when I heard that the game was actually brought out that there was the engine was based on, I was just it's incredible. I thought this is fantastic. This is my thing, ancient history. This is what I want a game to be about. And prior to that, there were games like Caesar, which was good fun. There were games like Civilization. There were other games where you could play, but this seemed like the most new thing that with bigger and better ideas. So I picked that up and I absolutely loved it, and I still play it on occasion, or the remastered version. It was um, the general premise was you could have one of three factions, but there was a mod. I mean, the modding community got onto this pretty quickly. So you had Rome Total Realism, which meant that you could play solely as Rome, which didn't mean you had this weird dynamic because the game was great, but it really did have some odd things that happened in it. You had just from some of the units, you had the Arcani, who were these kind of Roman ninjas who never made sense, but were, I suppose, good fun. You had this civil revolt mechanic, which I'm annoyed they didn't fix when they remastered it, and I understand why. The general premise was that a city would revolt once it got past a certain size, and that was linked in some way to the distance to the capital of Rome, which is something they also carried on with, I think, Medieval Total War or Medieval 2, which will get a mention. It wasn't. I didn't really quite understand the premise behind that because what essentially happened is you kept having to farm these cities once they grew past a certain size. You took out all of the cultural bits that had been built in the city. So a market, if it wasn't Roman, you had to demolish it. You did as much as you could, and then you were left to kind of wait until it invariably revolted. But I suppose you could always. It was always a great way of getting money. But it was just fantastic. It was very cathartic at points, particularly bridge battles. Bridge battles were fantastic, particularly if they had elephants and you made the elephants rout on the bridge. And it was, yeah, I don't know if that says a particularly nice thing about me, but it was very cathartic watching the absolute carnage that would happen. And it also introduced me to Cretan Archers as my favorite, probably my favorite gaming unit. I loved Cretan Archers. They were great, and they still are. And when I'm even now I'm playing Rome 2, I'll always make a beeline to recruit. Although I think you have to do it if you're as Rome as mercenaries. Initially, I think you might be able to build up some stuff. But anyway, I always go and get them. Them and the Rhodian or Balearic slingers seem fantastic. So I just really, really enjoyed the game. Although the one tip, never auto resolve, particularly if you're facing chariots, because you could have an army full of Turian cohorts, and they have just one unit of Scythe chariots or Egyptian chariots or whatever, and they will beat you on auto resolve. And they always used to wind me up. The chariots were the bane. They were fantastically difficult to play against. And I never really played much with Egypt. Apparently, to use them was really quite difficult as well. They always seemed better handled when it was the AI using them than when you used them. But yeah, Rome Total War, just a great game, and yeah, lots of fun. Although some weird, the one final thing, sometimes the weird pathfinding with units, you'd sort of be laying siege to a city and everyone's like decided to form a single file, walk along the base of the wall for some reason. But you forgive it because it's just such a good game.
It's a very on brand pick. So the natural question would be, did the games lead to the history or did the history lead to the games?
No, no. By then I'd studied and I'd got my master's by this point, and I'd even done Roman reenactment because that's what I'd done some Roman reenactment back in 2001, I think it was. And I hadn't done it much. I only did it a couple of times, and then I've more recently been doing it more. But no, this was my uh, the sort of passion I had for ancient history sort of manifested in a game. I should add it. By the way, I would have equally been as happy with something a bit less um, military based, yeah, but it made sense that it was a military game. So no, this was a sort of culmination of those things, and it's why I still play the remastered version, and why I play Rome 2 even now, even with its all, even though it's not as good as Rome 1, I don't think, but that could be nostalgia talking.
Okay. Given your background, how do you feel about the historical accuracy in these games? Does it live up to what your expectations
Um,
are?
I don't tend to be that type of person because I know full well that you can have people who will just pick things apart. And I was like, well, excuse me. And bearing in mind, I do Roman reenactment. We're talking buckles. Oh, well, they've got that kind of buckle. Those kind of buckles were never found on a Roman in, they were restricted to the use in the East. You can get that level of, let's say, let's call it pedantic nature, or I think it's got a place sometimes, but not always everywhere. So, for example, in Rome Total War, you triggered the Marian reforms by, I think it was building a couple. of temples. You needed to build an awesome temple. I think that kicked it in. Yeah, it didn't really bother me too much, to be totally honest with you, because it's just fun. My position on accuracy is as long as people realize it's not inherently accurate, I don't have a problem with it because it usually gets people interested in ancient history. Otherwise, you become too restrictive. If you're saying that people can't enjoy something because it's not entirely accurate, you're moving people away from it. And there are things I think which sometimes aren't entirely responsible and perhaps need a bit more of a this is based on historical events. This isn't entirely accurate. And I'm not going to name any, but there've been a few TV shows, a few films, and things like that where there were a lot of liberties taken. And I know from speaking to some people who've marked exams that there've been stuff, for example, I will say 300, where people have sort of cited things from the film as a source in exam papers, and you can't really use a film that was based on a 1960s film that itself was based and then based, sorry, on a comic book. You can't really be using that as your source material. I mean, it's a good idea. It's interesting, and also the other thing to think of, particularly when it comes to Roman military. Roman military is not aesthetic. It's really like a meat grinder. That's what a Roman legion was. So, of course, when you put it on the big screen, and this is something that when I do reenactment, people think you're going to have kind of Johnny Depp, Jack Sparrow dancing around with a sword. That's not what Roman military was. It wasn't aesthetically that pleasing. It wasn't big film or the big screen. It wouldn't make good TV. It wasn't that interesting to watch. I mean, it was in a way, but it wasn't as, shall we say, dramatic as you might think it was. You can have people jumping around and things like that. So I understand sometimes why they have to make it look slightly different on film because you've got to make it look a bit more interesting than perhaps it was from a visual perspective. Obviously, though, it would still be fascinating to watch. I'm not sure I would like to, but you have to have that creative license, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to hear about some of the standout campaigns or anything that um, kind of really sticks in your memory from the game. If there's like one particular skirmish or battle where you think, like I was losing and then I turned the tides, or
I think, weirdly enough, I think with Rome less so. There was a game in Medieval 2 which was more arcadey, and you could do more because in Rome it was difficult to have games that weren't just you just chew through the enemy, and that's really what you try to do is within your Roman army. And there were some great ones. I think probably if I had to pick a couple, it was that first time where I had catapults and I loaded them up with fire sort of bolt things, and I managed to land one straight on an elephant, or an elephant unit. And I feel sorry because I feel it's really bad that elephants are involved in warfare because, believe it or not, even some of the Romans thought that they had no place doing that because they were lovely creatures, not to be sort of charging around in battle. And the elephant just routed straight away, but it routed all across the enemy line. Now, as I remember, this would have been, bearing in mind elephants, it would have been an eastern army, most likely an eastern army. So you're probably looking at hoplite or similar to hoplite infantry or something like that, heavy infantry. And all of a sudden you've got these elephants sort of rampaging through their own lines. And what I always found quite interesting and sadistic, particularly with the AI when it came to Rome, was that units just didn't move. You could be hitting them from a distance with catapults, and it would you just they would just take a huge amount of damage, and everyone would just step to the side, form up again, wait for the next one. And these elephants just were running through their own lot, and it was just wow. Just watching from a distance the absolute carnage that the elephants were causing. In Medieval 2, there was one instance, and it was where I had defending in a castle, and I'm not sure which mod I had, but it was one where you could get mangonels, which fired exploding barrels of oil or something. And I had a couple of those set up near the entrance of the castle gate, and the enemy came through. They'd massed through. I was barely holding them back, and it was a real Hail Mary. I thought this is either going to land on my own lot, and that's it. They threw, they lobbed the barrels, and they they landed right dead center of this mass that centered around as they were breaking through the gate, and everything went red and then charred black, and they all routed. And it was, yeah, that was, I still remember that as being, I think many people had that similarly with Cannon and stuff like that. Rome, probably when I got the elephants to rout, and I think that was always something you tried to do early on. If ever you were fighting elephants, you had to get your archers flaming arrows or something on them, and soon enough they'd rout. But to see them rout and just trample the enemy, God, this doesn't sound very good listening back to it all. That was good. But so, yeah, so I think that was probably one of the times or one of the battles. And also you'd find that on bridges. If you could have that on a bridge, I've actually seen replays of people doing that on bridges, bridge battles, which are always great to watch. And again, that sounds so bad coming back. I need to go and speak to someone, I think. So so there we
No,
go.
I love it. It makes me want to play the game and witness some mayhem caused by elephants, either obviously them charging through an army, or yes, decimating your own army because they're routed. Okay, so on to our final and fifth pick.
Final game, 2011. This is kind of important to me for quite a few reasons. So first of all, it's just a fantastic game. I love it to bits. But also, it happened at a time where I was having a bit of difficulty because I'd been made redundant. I knew I was about to be made redundant. And if you've ever been in that situation, you kind of try and hang on as long as you can in your role. And my boss had been very supportive, and I'd managed to stay on an extra sort of 6 months. I knew it was coming, and I was made redundant, and it was around October of this year. And it was difficult because, for world job market, no one's going to hire until after in the new year. I'd got enough to kind of keep me ticking for a few months, but straight away, if anyone's been made redundant, you'll know the most important thing is routine. So what I do every day, get up, go for a walk, come back, have breakfast, job hunt, apply for jobs, double check whatever I could do. If it meant me walking into town and going and visit job agencies and sort of saying hi and sort of I'm still here, that kind of a thing. And what I found that this guy, I've been told this game is coming out that would take you somewhere else. And I thought this could be only be a good thing. I could have perhaps an hour or two in the afternoon when I'd done everything I could do, reward myself by not thinking about needing a job. Because again, I don't want to bring don't want to bring anyone down or make people feel sad or sorry. But when you don't have a job, you're always thinking about not having a job, and it can be a weird place at times. And the game was Skyrim, and I got the game, and I'd never played anything like it before. So I wasn't someone who came from a background of playing the previous versions or anything much like it before. And it was fantastic because it took me away from where I was at the time. And the soundtrack was amazing. I still have the soundtrack now. The soundtrack for the last 3 years has been my most listened to soundtrack, and the songs, most of them are most listened to songs. 'Cause I just have it on whenever I feel a bit. Uh, I just want to be chilled out. It chills me out. Some of the tracks less so, but most of them are pretty relaxing, and I just have that on. It was a really unique game in many ways. And again, I apologize for my gaming naivety because perhaps some of these mechanics had been in place elsewhere. But for example, the leveling system, you didn't get experience points for completing a mission. You got experience points for doing stuff, which I don't know if that was had been done before. And that was great because you could just be sneaking around and suddenly your sneak level would go up. Whereas, you cleared out a cave, you'd found the horn or returned whatever it is that needed to be returned to someone, and you didn't get anything from that specifically in terms of experience. So it made you play the game in lots of different ways. And it was so varied, and it had this weird contradiction because at the center of it you are the dragonborn, you are the special one, but on the other hand no one really cares too much about you. You get quips from the guards, you people are just giving you grief. You've got Nazim um you know judging you, and at the same time, there's a whole world that exists around you that doesn't really care too much. You could be walking down the road and you'll see a troll beating someone up, and you don't have to, sorry, a giant beating someone up, and you don't have to really get involved, or you do have to get involved. Everyone goes through that first time of trying to engage with a giant and getting launched into the atmosphere. It's entertaining. The first time it happens, always is. But for example, there are things that when I still play it now, I I had never met the headless horseman until recently. That's in there. And likewise, you can bump into Cicero while he's transporting something, no spoilers there, in a car, and you help him repair the car. But if you miss it, you miss it. So there's all these things kind of going on within the game that make you realize that it isn't just no one in the game exists because you're important. They exist because they're there and they're doing their own thing. And that's why you could just go in there. And there have been times when I've just more in the more recent versions when you've got the is it the ability you've got the expansion so you can build houses and stuff like that. I'm just going to go in. I'm just going to go and mine a bunch of iron, and I'm going to go and smith myself some nails because I want to build another section to one of my new houses that I want to build, and just do that. I don't have to do anything else. But then also, if I want to go and clear a cave of bandits or beat up a dragon or do something else, I can do that. So it gave you the space between the big narratives that you had to follow, the storylines that were really important, and the less ones, the ones that sort of the mundane tasks that sometimes you were given. So find this book, but also stuff you could find to do on yourself. So I need to go and get a number of these ingredients, and so it was all of those things. And I just still to this day find it an incredible escape game that I can just go into and just yeah, thinking about it now, I'm thinking of the load up screens with a particular soundtrack, and I just want to go and play it. I might get back into it this afternoon. And yes, in case you're thinking, I invariably go for a stealth archer build. I always think about all the other builds possible, but I always chicken out. I always start with, yeah, I'll try mage. I never try mage. I know that mage is really powerful towards the end game. Early on, and that's why the other reason I really like about the game. Early on, you are being eaten and killed by everything. You know, that first time you sort of run around near Whiterun and a saber tooth gets near you, game over. Mud crabs are actually viable things. And then there's always that rite of passage of that frost troll on the way up to the throat of the world. And when you're going up the mountain, wow, that is when you first see that and you just realize how much stamina you need to run because that's what you do. Although you can technically, there is a way you can snipe the troll, but I was never brave enough early on to be able to do that. I just used to run a lot. So yeah, lots of things. And two tips I've got for this game. Two tips I always tell people. First of all, Lover's Stone is the best thing to activate early on because you get an XP increase for everything, not just the things you're going to focus your character on. And if you want to be leveling up early on to get access to stamina, health, magic, you need to be doing as much in those other skill areas as possible to level up. So always go Lover's Stone early on. It's a bit tricky to get to, and there is a bear. The other thing is Bound Bow. So Bound Bow is a great spell early on. It gives you a very powerful bow with unlimited arrows. So you're saving on weight. They're very quick. They're certainly well, more effective than any gear you're likely to get. You do need though to level up your magic a bit, and you do need to go to Fort Amol, which is quite tricky. And then it's in a bucket in one of the main rooms in Fort Amol. Go and get it. You can use invisibility potion, I think, to go in there because the level of the characters, if you're kind of right around 13, 14, it's going to be really troublesome. So you've got to kind of find a way to get it. But those are the things that I always go for straight away. So it's Skyrim, and it's still a game I play now.
Thanks for sharing. You did answer my question, which was going to be what was your build type, but I think inevitably all roads do lead to stealth archer in most cases. It's hard to beat that one. One of the questions I was going to ask, like, given that you picked up this game when it was an uncomfortable and stressful part of your life,
Mm,
you still have that positive association. Like, you still want to
mm.
replay it. You don't think back and think, oh, that was really tough. And that's kind of merged with that memory. Like, it's really fascinating. Like, why do you think that is? Like, is that due to the game, you think?
I think yeah, but I mean, I should just add as well. I got caught up in the bug, the early game bug. I should actually just say generally that the bugs are some of the great things about Skyrim. You know, you get weird things like dragons falling out the sky, and I have seen a troll, sorry, a giant surfing a dragon. So just on the back of a dragon flying around. You just see it, and everyone's like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, carry on. I think it was because it helped me a great deal, and I don't mean to go too much navel gazing in that regard, but it was somewhere that I could not think about not having a job. And for that reason, I've always associated with a sort of calming, quite peaceful aspect, even though what you're invariably doing in there sometimes is the complete opposite. But I found it just such a a good game at the right time. But early on, like I say, there was this bug where it was to do with memory bleed. And what it turned the game into is over a certain file save size, it turned the game into a PowerPoint presentation. So the frame rate just dropped to ridiculousness. And it took them a good few months to fix it. I think they fixed it it was in the summer of the following year. So I'd been continually playing the game up until a certain point where I couldn't progress any further because the game would invariably start glitching out. So I learnt the early part of the game very well. And then there are other glitches that sometimes occur, which meant you had to restart because a player wouldn't appear somewhere, and therefore you couldn't resolve one of the main quests. But it was just, yeah, it was. I think games for anyone. I don't think it's just me and Skyrim. I think when you're thinking about games that you've played, everyone's got a game, I suspect, that they've gone to when they're not at their, yeah, not feeling great about life, or they're not just feeling that everything's going brilliant. There are games that you play which will pick your mood up, but there are also games you can go to where you just want to escape. And I think that's one of the important things. There's a bit of snobbery. If this was a book, if I told you, oh, actually, I was going through a really rough time, so I picked up, I don't know, insert really, really intelligent, clever, oh, Brief History of Time. I was feeling really, really down with life, so I picked up the Brief History of Time. It might have just took me somewhere else. Everyone would be like, wow, that's you're one clever guy. But you can still have that same relationship with the game. It doesn't mean anything different. And I think that that's the great thing about gaming, and it goes back to something that I experienced when I first started interacting with games. There's a story there. There's a way of exploring something. There's a space you can go to, like a book, like a film, like any piece of art. And that's why I sort of consider it or hold it in that same context.
No, I completely agree with you, and it's a great pick. Not that there's any bad pick for Desert Island, but in terms of being stranded on a desert island, I could think of worse games than Skyrim to while away the time. Okay, that's your 5 picks. I have to ask, like, before we wrap up, do you have
Mm.
any honorable mentions, games that didn't quite make the cut?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned a couple there. So Medieval Total War 2 would have been there if it wasn't for Rome. And Medieval 2 is just a great game for anyone who's played it. It's just a lot of fun. It's arcadey fun. Other honorable mentions though, so we've got Civilization, the early versions, because again, ancient history, was really quite interested in it. Having settlers build roads early on seemed to have a fascination for me, or irrigating things. There was also Populous. Populous was, I think, was an Amiga game, and that was good fun. And that it had some mythic elements in it as well, but it was a lot of fun. More recent ones, such as Red Dead 2, that's got a very poignant ending, and I was not prepared for that. Now, I am not a man given to uh, overt sort of shows of any kind of emotion, but I was kind of, I need to go for a walk. Towards the end of that, that was something else. Grand Theft Auto. San Andreas was just a great game. Lots of different things. It was the more recent versions are, something else. They're really good games as well, for all sorts of reasons. So it was really difficult finding games to exclude and why you exclude them because you find five, guarantee when you first find five, you'll find 10 or 15, and then you've got to work out which ones you don't have. So it's not about really, if anyone's going to do this at home, it's not about what makes your top five, is what prevents it from being in your top five. That's the question to ask, and that could be really difficult.
It's extremely hard to pick this, and those are some, like, objectively amazing games in there, like Red Dead Redemption 2. Like, so yeah, the fact that obviously those 5 that you picked, they're personal to you, like, it's, yeah, couldn't imagine living without them on this desert island. So yeah, it's not an easy task. But I'm going to ask you an even harder question: is the waves are kind of crashing upon the shore. You don't have time to secure all of them. You can only grab one game before the rest wash away. What would that one game be?
I think it would have to be Skyrim. I I can't think of any of the others. When I think of which one, if I had to play one for the rest of time, it would probably be Skyrim for many of the reasons I've listed, but just the sheer variety within the game, the things that you can do, the lore. If you've got all the time, you can finally get rounded reading all those apparently rude books about Argonian maids and all the other types of books that are around. Which I very rarely read. I just look at them. I can do all of the things that getting into the game that I never really get the chance to do, and it would also be a game that would, again, make me perhaps forget how bad I was at trying to survive on my own. Um, yeah, and perhaps I could pick up a few bits about building stuff as well.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, Neil, that's your 5. Thanks so much for sharing them. It's been a great conversation. I really appreciate you sharing the stories behind these games. Again,
Thanks for giving me the opportunity.
you're more than welcome. If people, again, want to find you and your work, where should they go?
If you are trying to find me on social media, just look up Ancient Blogger, all one word, and I'm on X, Instagram, Blue Sky, TikTok. Um, as I said, I've got my YouTube channel. It's all ancient history content with a couple photos of my dog, and that's really it. So it's not you're not going to get anything else much other than that. Yeah, and if you've got any feedback on anything that I've talked about in terms of gaming, find me, have a conversation. And again, there's the Ancient History Hound podcast and subreddit, so you can find that on there and just come say hi.
Thank you. The links will all be in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this, follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. If you can find the show on social media at diskdrivepod or email joe@diskdrivepod.com. And if you got your own 5 games or you know someone with a story worth telling, get in touch. But for now, thanks for listening.